They say life can change in a heartbeat, but for Emily Parker, that heartbeat had been slow and heavy for as long as she could remember. She was 24, standing behind the counter of a small, worn-out diner that smelled of coffee and fried bacon, with a faded sign outside that flickered when it rained. The tiles on the floor were cracked, the booths squeaked when you sat on them, and the coffee machine hissed like it was complaining about the long hours just as much as she was. She'd been working here for 3 years, sometimes pulling double shifts, sometimes skipping meals just so she could cover her mother's rising medical bills and keep her younger brother in school. Emily didn't dream of riches anymore, she only dreamed of surviving one more month without falling apart. It was a cold Tuesday evening in late November when he walked in. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a sharp black suit that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover, and a pair of dark eyes that carried something heavy in them, something deeper than money could fix. His hair was perfectly in place, but his tie was loosened, as if the day had been longer than most. Emily noticed him immediately, not because of his appearance, but because he seemed out of place here. People like him didn't usually walk into diners like this, especially not alone. He chose the booth by the window, sat down without looking at the menu, and ordered a black coffee in a low, quiet voice. Emily nodded and brought it over a few minutes later. She expected him to take a sip right away, but he didn't. He just stared out at the rain streaking the glass, his hands resting on the table as if he was waiting for something, or maybe remembering something he wished he could forget. At another booth in the corner, a group of men in expensive coats were talking loudly. Emily caught bits of their conversation. They were laughing, but not the friendly kind of laugh, this was the cutting, mocking kind. She didn't catch every word, but she realized they were talking about the man by the window. About how the great Daniel Hart was slumming it in a place like this. She had no idea who Daniel Hart was, but the way they spoke made her blood boil. Emily could have ignored it. She had learned to stay out of customers' arguments, to keep her head down if she wanted to keep her job. But there was something about the man's quiet dignity, the way he didn't even acknowledge their words, that made her want to step in. She walked over to the group, heart pounding, and said firmly, "If you can't respect the people around you, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The laughter stopped. They stared at her, stunned that a waitress in a faded uniform had the nerve to speak up. One of them muttered something under his breath, but they paid and left soon after, still grumbling. When Emily turned back, she caught a small smile on the man's face. It wasn't a big grin, just a quiet, grateful curve of his lips, as if her simple act had meant more than she realized. The next day, he came back. Ordered coffee again, sat by the same window. This time, when Emily brought his drink, he asked her name. "Emily," she said, unsure why a man like him would care. He introduced himself simply as Daniel, without a last name. He started coming in every day after that. Sometimes he ordered coffee, sometimes just a glass of water. They started talking. At first, it was small things, the weather, the book she was reading behind the counter, the way the rain made the city look like it was covered in silver. But slowly, the conversations went deeper. She learned that Daniel wasn't just a man in a suit. He had lost his wife 3 years ago in an accident, and though his business empire kept growing, his heart had been standing still ever since. She also learned, though not from his lips, that he was the owner of the diner chain itself. He never flaunted it. Never made her feel small. Emily couldn't understand why someone like him would spend time with someone like her. She wasn't glamorous. Her hair was often tied up in a messy bun because she didn't have time to style it. Her hands were always a little dry from the constant washing. She lived in a small apartment that always smelled faintly of the laundry soap she bought in bulk. But Daniel seemed to value something she didn't even realize she had, honesty. She never pretended with him, never acted like she knew things she didn't. And that, perhaps, was what kept him coming back. One night, after her shift, Daniel offered her a ride home. She hesitated, worried about what people might say, but she accepted. They drove through the quiet streets, the hum of the engine filling the silence until Daniel suddenly asked, "If you could do anything, anything at all, what would you do?" Emily laughed softly, thinking he was joking. But when she saw he was serious, she told him, "I'd open a small cafe. Not for profit. A place where people who are struggling can come in, have a warm meal, rest for a while, even if they can't pay. I want it to feel like a home." She didn't expect him to remember. But he listened as if every word mattered. Over the next few weeks, little things began to change in her life. Her mother's medication suddenly became more affordable because of an anonymous donation. Her brother's school fees were quietly covered. She guessed it was Daniel, though he never admitted it. Emily resisted at first. She had always been fiercely independent, but Daniel never made her feel like a charity case. He treated her like an equal. Then one evening, Daniel invited her to a charity gala. Emily almost refused. She didn't own a gown, didn't belong in a room full of millionaires sipping champagne under crystal chandeliers. But Daniel told her, "Come as you are. You belong anywhere you choose to be." The night of the gala, Daniel sent a simple, elegant dress for her. Nothing extravagant, but when she put it on, she felt like a different version of herself, a version she'd almost forgotten could exist. At the event, she noticed the stares. People whispered about the waitress on Daniel Hart's arm. Some were curious, some judgmental. Emily felt their eyes like weight on her shoulders, but Daniel's hand in hers kept her steady. When someone tried to make a cutting remark about her being out of place, Daniel simply smiled and said, "She's exactly where she belongs." It was in that moment Emily realized, he didn't just care about her. He respected her. And respect was worth more than any diamond. Months passed, and their bond deepened. Daniel was patient, never rushing her into anything more than she was ready for. Emily's life was still filled with long shifts and bills, but she found herself smiling more, laughing at little things again. One spring evening, Daniel took her to a quiet garden on his estate. The roses were in full bloom, their petals catching the golden light of sunset. He stopped by a small stone bench and turned to her. "Emily," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, "I told myself I'd never love again. And then I met you. You reminded me what it means to care, to hope, to dream. I don't want to spend another day without you." Her heart raced. She thought of the cracked tiles of the diner, the nights she cried herself to sleep over bills, the mornings she doubted her worth. She thought of how far apart their worlds were. And then she thought of the man who had sat alone at her booth on a rainy Tuesday, who had listened to her dreams, who had stood beside her when the world judged her. "Yes," she whispered. Their wedding wasn't the grand, glittering affair the media expected. Daniel insisted it be small, intimate, with only those who truly mattered. The press still called her Queen afterward, Queen of his heart, Queen of his empire, but Emily never forgot the girl she once was. With Daniel's support, she opened her cafe exactly as she dreamed. A place with warm lights, fresh bread, and coffee that smelled like comfort. People came not just for the food, but for the kindness. No one was ever turned away, no matter how little they had. She called it the Second Chance Cafe. Every now and then, a customer would ask her how a waitress became a queen. Emily would smile and say, "By never changing who I was, even when the world told me to." As for Daniel, he often told people that Emily didn't just become his queen, she saved his life. She gave him back the one thing money couldn't buy, love without conditions. And so, their story was never about a billionaire rescuing a waitress. It was about two broken souls who found a home in each other's hearts. About kindness, respect, and the courage to see beyond what the world sees. If you're hearing this now, remember, your life can change in a single moment. Be yourself, hold on to your dreams, and never underestimate the power of kindness. And if you believe in stories like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Kindness Stories, because love like this can happen anywhere, even in a small diner on a rainy Tuesday night.